And how long and how often in our society do we stand and talk about the long struggle in these situations people have for two things, for the truth and for justice? Well, today is something of a landmark, and the victims we've been speaking to have certainly acknowledged that they have a degree of truth and acknowledgement, incredibly precious to people who survived these awful episodes. Justice, that's for another day yet. A devastating double demand from the guardians of Scottish football. Clubs with histories smeared by child sex abuse must make a, quote, clear, unreserved and public apology. Then they must pay up compensation to the scores of victims who must come first, middle and last in this story.
In terms of compensation, clubs will be reading the report. Clubs will be as horrified as anybody else reading what is a very, very difficult report to read. As you've said, the narrative from the survivors is harrowing, and it's appalling to think that any individuals have been subjected to that, and I'm sure clubs will do the right thing going forward.
Go down and give evidence to
Malcolm Roger, a decorated former British soldier and a victim, deeply scarred, but speaking out, welcoming this report as progress.
It does make it a hell of a lot easier. It's only going to be published once. So some people, myself, would say we're quite close to the finishing line.
And Bill Storey, another victim, courageously talking about the unspeakable. Like Malcolm, he broke his silence for the Channel 4 News investigation into this last year.
Please just stick your hand up and said, you know something, we're accountable for this.
The compensation aspect.
Today, he says, marks a leap forward.
The good thing that I'm pleased to see is, in one word, the acknowledgement. And to me, that says quite a bit, because before, as victims, what we were struggling to come to terms with was not any acknowledgement from anywhere.
Critical to today's report is its scathing attack on the very biggest clubs for failing to take what happened seriously year after year after year. Yes, it was Hibs, Rangers and a slew of other clubs, large and small, but more than any other club, it was Celtic. For years, Celtic Football Club have tried to say that what was going on in their youth and allied organisations was somehow separate to the club itself. Today's independent report, commissioned by the Scottish Football Association, appears to demolish that excuse. The review is of the view that if the relationship and history between the youth football club and the senior club was so shared, so close and so inextricable, then when sexual abuse of young players formed part of the history of one, then it too formed part of the history of the other. A shared heritage is not confined to trophies, victories and celebration. It also extends to defeats, failures and deficiencies.
Why they continued with that line, I don't know, Alex. To me, it was a way of escaping the responsibility that should have rested on their shoulders.
We asked for Celtic to respond to this, but they declined our request for an interview today, as they did a year ago. The report also finds Rangers culpable, noting that when one victim complained to the club about abuse, he was told they couldn't help because the old club had been liquidated. We asked Rangers to respond, but have heard nothing back.
Can you and will you demand and force clubs to apologise if those apologies are not forthcoming, as this report has asked for?
Clubs are businesses in their own right, Alex. They'll make their own decisions. As I said, we have apologised and will continue to do so, and I'm sure clubs will be trying to do the right thing going forward.
Renewed momentum now then for scores, perhaps hundreds of compensation cases heading for the courts.
It's a massive issue. There are hundreds of survivors who have been affected by the issues raised in this report, and I really hope now that they can take some consolation from what is in the report, and also that the SFA and the clubs now take action.
For so many victims, it isn't about money though, it's about recognition, acknowledgement, apology. For Malcolm Rogers, up close, personal, eyeball to eyeball apology.
I would like them to look at each victim in the eye and make that apology. I understand from your profession Alex, that it is important for the wider audience to know what's been happening, but the people who have had this duty of care say it in person. That's what actually has to happen.
Today's report delivers the truth, the acknowledgement. It now rests with the clubs and courts to deliver justice.
Joining me now is James Dornan, the SNP MSP for Glasgow Cathcart. He's a lifelong Celtic Football Club fan who's previously called for the Scottish Football Association to establish an inquiry into allegations of sexual abuse against children. James Dornan, let's start where Alex left off there with the clubs, and how crucial is it that there is an apology from those clubs and compensation to follow?
Yeah, I've always thought that the clubs owed the people who were abused a strong apology, and more than that, they should be making reparations for what happened to them. There seems to, I mean, first of all, let me say that I welcome this report. It's been a long time coming, but it seems to be a strong report and putting responsibility where it lies, and that is in the hands of the football clubs that should have been responsible for these young men, and in one case a woman, and they weren't. So I think it's good to see that in the first place.
Well, how likely is it that those clubs will do the right thing, in your view, apologise and then make reparations?
It'll certainly be very difficult for them to hide from their responsibility after this report. It does make it clear that, for example, the link between the boys' club and the senior club is one that should hold them responsible. The interesting thing about this is I read these disturbing reports today, the case studies, which were horrible, and I was a bit shocked at the wide range of clubs that were involved. But every single one of them owes these victims and survivors an apology, reparations as best they can, and help them even after this length of time to get on with the rest of their lives.
You're a Celtic fan, but you've received quite a lot of criticism from the club for shining a light on all of this. Do you think they're still in denial?
There's people within every organisation that don't like to be accused of things like this, and particularly when it happened maybe before their time at the club. But the fact is that they're the custodians of a great establishment. They are the ones who have to make sure that that establishment does the right thing. I have had a fair bit of abuse, both from the club and from certain supporters, but I was brought up to believe that Celtic were a club who would do the right thing, and I'm still hoping that that will now be the case here.
Obviously, it's too late for some victims, and some of the suspects have died. But what are the prospects now for justice in the courts for the others?
There's been justice in the courts to some extent for some of them. I know that people have been tried and found guilty. If there's a possibility, then I think that everybody, the justice system, the clubs, the football authorities, everybody should get behind that to make sure that these people can see the justice that they deserve, even if it's at this late stage.
James Dornan, thanks very much for joining us.